I know the kind of pain you're feeling, Alex. I once had it myself.
You some kind of doctor?
No, Alex. I am Magneto, and I have come to offer you sanctuary.
Welcome to the second season of Grounded Futures podcast. This is the show where we discuss topics ranging from climate change to identity to how youth can gain new skills to thrive amid current and ongoing disasters that we are collectively facing. We are your hosts, Liam and Carla.
Hello, everyone. I'm Carla, and thanks for tuning in to Grounded Futures. We produce the show on Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh lands, but our guests are from around the world. The music for our show is by Sauergout, also known as Zach Bergman.
And for today's show, we are joined by Dean Spade. Dean has been working to build queer and trans liberation based in racial and economic justice for the past 2 decades. He's the author of Normal Life, Administrative Violence, Critical Trans Politics, and the Limits of Law, the director of the documentary Pinkwashing Exposed, Seattle Fights Back, and the creator of the mutual aid toolkit at Big Door Brigade. .com.
.com.
Yeah. His latest book, Mutual Aid Building Solidarity During This Crisis and the Next, was published by Verso Press in October 2020. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, welcome, Dean. God, that book was timely, hey? Oh my gosh. Yeah, I wanted to actually just start off with a quote. I'm going to quote you. I do this. It's weird, but I like to quote my guests so that people out there get a little sense of your voice up front. Mostly I chose this one because it's something we care about on the show and then on the larger Grounded Futures platform, as well as beyond that. And this is a quote from Dean. Activism and mutual aid shouldn't feel like volunteering or like a hobby. It should feel like living in alignment with our hopes for the world and with our passions. It should enliven us.
Oh, so cool. So good. I guess we'll start the first question then. Okay, great. When did you first become active in organizing? Was there a spark and connected? How have your ideas changed, transformed, shifted over the years? And what ideas still remain?
Good question. When I think about this, like the first thing I think about is like, I was in 6th grade when like my school decided to like fire a teacher and like change a program. And I held a sit-in that was like 2 8th graders, or there were a bunch of people sat in, but we were the only ones who refused to leave when they told us that like, if we didn't leave, that we were going to get in trouble. And then I got suspended from school. And I think, my mom was someone who had like a question authority bumper sticker. She was not an activist. She was like, working class woman who'd never gone to high school, who was like, just kind of like, like cursed a lot and like had an attitude about authority. And so I think I knew that. I think I had a little bit of space for me to be like that. So like she was really proud of me. She was like, this is like the 60s, like it was the 80s. So I feel like that idea that you talk back and cause trouble was not, even though I didn't have like developed models of it and like grew up in a school system where I didn't learn anything that was real about social movements. I just learned all the like made up stuff that is in the US curriculum. I think that was like a sense I had that you should talk back and that you should stand up for people and for yourself. And then I got like really interested in feminism when I was like late in high school, which was really inaccessible set of ideas to where I lived in like a very rural place. There was just so much sexism happening around me, like just so much sexual violence was really normal in the circles I was in. And it was really racialized. But I wasn't really doing organizing. I think I didn't really do more. Like, I think I really came to understand more what organizing actually was when I moved to New York City in the mid 90s, and I was working at a gay bookstore and I got involved. I was interested in like kind of what we might call mainstream gay politics, because it's the only one I was familiar with. But then I, like through people I met at work who were like in sex worker organizing and who were like doing like anti-Giuliani organizing. He was the mayor of New York City. He was like doing really intense attacks on poor people and homeless people and people with disabilities, and like trying to, he was trying to make the city, gentrify the city so that'd be like fun for tourists and like get rid of all the sex workers and people who use drugs and just, everybody who he saw as was in the way. And so I became involved really then in like unpaid street organizing that included a range of things like, we were involved in trying to fight the city around how the welfare authority dealt with housing for people with AIDS. So like things like that, where we're like locking ourselves to the doors of the welfare authority, or we're like doing like accompanying people through all these appointments at the welfare authority and being like, we're not leaving this office until you give somebody a place to sleep tonight because you're supposed to, or whatever, like that kind of stuff. And stuff that was more like about pushing back on like what was an emerging kind of like neoliberal gay politics at that time. Like there was more and more of this kind of like white mainstream gay stuff happening, like we should get married and join the military. So we were also opposing that. What have changed in my ideas? That's such a good question. I mean, I think some things that stay the same are like, I was really motivated to come into being political because of my own experiences growing up in poverty and like seeing, my mom died of poverty when I was a kid, just like seeing all of that stuff happen and seeing the like brutal unfairness of like racism where I lived. And those things still motivate me, and like a strong feeling that everybody should be accompanied through like these brutal systems. Like we should get rid of those systems, but also meanwhile, like nobody should have to go to a welfare hearing alone. Nobody should have to go to like a hearing and have their kids taken away alone. Like just, and we don't have that yet. Like everyone's still pretty alone in it. I think that what's developed over time, when I was younger, I really wanted to be a lawyer. And I really thought that like, maybe like I heard stories about like big lawsuits that change things for people, or like wanted to like defend people, from these systems. And over time, I'm like, oh, like that's what, like that, I don't think that that's where it's at. Like, I actually don't think that like we're going to pass laws or have lawsuits that like free us. I really think that like the country I live in, the United States, is like operating like exactly as designed. Its prisons are operating as designed. It's systems of extraction that make people poor and make the poison people's air and water. Like all of it is like going totally according to plan, and I can't work inside those plans to fix that. And so over time, I learned that I was a prison abolitionist and a border abolitionist. I learned that I'm an anarchist and I'm against countries, and like that. I care a ton about how we do the work. I didn't know that. I was just like, let's get these outcomes. And over time, I learned like, oh, how we all do the work is actually what's going to produce the world we're going to live in. So that's like a really different focus than like I would say I had when I was first encountering my anger at like sexism and racism and stuff. So yeah, there's like through lines, I think, of like hating authority, hating hierarchy. And then there's also like, actually, I don't want to climb any of those hierarchies. I want to like participate in figuring out how we can even practice not acting like that, with each other.
That's really good. Yeah, that's cool.
I love how I love when people can see the threads.
Yeah.
Oh, there's the dog. Dogs are welcome. This is a sanctuary.
So
Or we attempt for one. Well, speaking, so thank you for answering that question so beautifully. I'm really obsessed with ideas and how they seem to stay, like they, we evolve, we have consciousness. I think there's like plural many, many times but there's like these threads. And so thank you so much for taking on that question. I know it's a big one. But just thinking about your work in terms of mutual aid and like there's just so much need. I mean, especially in the US. And so one of the things I'm noticing is that a lot of what gets called like quote direct action is actually one-way service provision, even when it's not charity, right? So not quite mutual aid, but there's something else going on. And it's interesting you talk about extraction, because I'm curious where the reciprocity is living in those instances. And yeah, like what are your thoughts? Have you noticed this? Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things I spend a lot of my time doing now is just like working directly with mutual aid groups that are just like, oh, like will you help us make a decision-making structure, or we're having this conflict, or we none of us have ever done any kind of activism of any kind before, and now suddenly we are a group of 200 and we're supporting people in this encampment and it's being raided or whatever, So I've just been really supporting people with that work. And something a lot of people are running into is like, oh no, is our mutual aid work charity? Because there's not a lot of reciprocity. And I think that one reason that is happening in some settings, like say you're doing direct support people in a homeless encampment, and like a lot of people doing the support work are not or never have been unhoused, and then a lot of people receiving support are like they're just not in a position to come to meetings and do governance work, or they don't want to right now, or their level of chaos of the raids from the cops and the loss of their meds, and it's just like, and I just am like that when the conditions are this unequal, I think there just might be a lot of that, and it can't be a reason to not do the support work. Like, that's like the kind of like the perfectionism thing in our movements. It's like, yep, our work isn't perfect. Like we wish we could have it look all the ways that we dream of it looking, and it doesn't right now. And I think there can be a move like, oh my God, I'm so afraid of being criticized, I'm just going to stop. So I think that I've been trying to work with groups around that a lot. Like, okay, what would make the easiest, most accessible possible way for people right now who aren't participating in governance to do that? Like, is it just like when you're sitting at the phone charging station, you just have conversations one-on-one with people, and you're not trying to get them to come to an additional meeting, but you're just like, hey, we're sitting here while your phone is charging. What do you think? Should we add a Wednesday shift or not? You know what I mean? Or is Thursday better? Like, whatever. Like, can you glean people's wisdom, since we know that people like surviving crisis are more likely to have wisdom about the crisis and what they need than anybody else? But do we also not like need to be like, well, our collective is 75% people who are currently unhoused? It's like that just might not be a thing, or lots of different vulnerable people. Like, it gets in the way of some of the ways they might want to politically participate if that wasn't happening. So I think it's a dilemma. There are impacts on not having that. It's not like it's okay, but it's also like, I mean, the other thing is, I don't know if you have run into this, but so strongly, it's just like, like we need so many more people doing mutual aid work. Like the level of crisis is so high. And like since I'm sticking to the example of like people living in encampments and getting raided all the time, like right now, we don't have enough people in the groups doing support to actually fight off the cops and stop the raids. Like that's what we want. That would be the ultimate right on mutual aid thing, would be like, you cannot raid this space because there's 1,000 of us here and there's only 250 cops or whatever. Like that would be really amazing. So right now people just help people move. So if people help people pack, it's like 7 people are helping 40 people pack up their tents and bring them not sure where, and don't have enough cars. I mean, just like, it's like, this is not feasible. And so I think one question that we're all having is like, how do we get more people doing this work and doing it in a sustained way? And when there's only 7 people doing it, the project's probably going to fall apart because like people are going to get burned out. There's going to be conflict. And so like, I think the other question is like, we just need so many more people to participate in every one of our movement tactics, but in mutual aid is a lot of people's first entry point. So I feel like it's a really important one. And it's just like, we just need to support everybody who's being devoured, by the system. And like, it's a moral issue. It's a practical issue. And I think that would change also our capacity to do the kinds of activities that would bring more people into the work. You know what I mean? Like, it's also like, they're like, well, there's 7 of us and we need to pack up every time we hear about a raid, which is multiple times a week, we need to go help people pack. Do we have time to come up with a better way to do our meetings that's more accessible to people who are currently unhoused? Like that, people are having that dilemma about whether to build their own group infrastructure or do the like basic survival work. And that's because there's just not enough of them a lot of times, or a lot of people drop out. And if there's a whole thing we could talk about cultural passivity that tells us not to do the stuff, and that we're too burned out to do it, or we're too tired to do it from our work, and like gets in the way of us thinking we can do this stuff, for good reasons, but also we're under peopled, I think, in our people power right now.
Yeah, thank you so much for answering that question. I wrote a little pamphlet on 10 things I feel about mutual aid. And one of the things I unpacked was this idea of reciprocity, that it's actually not about that in the way that I think we think about it. Like, it's not a tit for tat. It's actually this beautiful web that goes way beyond. I think Graeber talked about it too, like in a, anthropological way. Like it's not a generalized reciprocity. It's very relational. It's a big web, and it's, something will happen for you down the road. And I think I really like talking about and thinking about mutual aid support on an emotional level. And I think that's probably what you're talking about too, here too, like just reaching out to people while they're charging their phone. I love that. Yeah. And no purity.
Can I add something to that? Just like what you're saying.
Yeah,
I mean, two
please.
things. One, it really was mind blowing for me. I'm studying anarchist theory more deeply than I ever have in the past. Like I came to these ideas mostly through like women of color feminisms and abolitionism stuff. And so I've been studying anarchist theory more, and what were people's lives like before capitalism produced the kinds of alienation we have now, or before there was like the kinds of hierarchies we live under now, or even earlier versions. And this whole thing where people like, there's a mythology in our capitalist culture that people used to live in a barter economy, and it was terrible because like I have a pound of wool and you have like a piece of steak, and it's like, how are we going to decide whatever what it's worth, and you can't break up the pound of wool. So it's so great that money came in and made everything fungible. But in reality, what all these people like Graeber and others say is that that's not how barter economies, that's not how it was. It was a gift economy in which like you need your fence fixed right now. So everybody in town who's able to help is going to come help. And then we all know that when we need our fence fixed, we're all going to get our fence fixed. And we all know that we're all going to eat the, vegetables we were able to grow because we had fences to keep the deer out or whatever. And so no one's going to be super poor and no one's going to be rich. And everyone's doing these kind of like shared work projects together. And like that, it's that relationality. Yeah. It's not about like, well, I fixed like Liam's fence. And so Liam better show up when it's like Liam might not be living by the time my fence is, or Liam may have just had a child, or Liam may be nursing a broken leg, and it doesn't matter. We will all make sure the fences get, and like, I feel like this comes up a lot because people feel like they need to hoard for their old age. Like that's one of the ideologies in capitalism is like, no one's going to help me out when I'm old, so I need to hoard. And it's like, what if we just gave everybody who's old right now everything they need, and everyone who's disabled and everybody who's nursing a new baby and everybody who might not be able to, do what they once could do because they've got stuff going on. And like that feeling of like, instead of a tit for tat, and that's how people have mostly lived, is like everybody wanted everybody to live. And how do you get that out of people? How do you like wrench that out of people where I'm like, it's more important for me to put money into this IRA than it is to like give money to this person who's like sleeping on the street in the snow right in front of me right now. Like, how do you make me into that? Like, that is so powerful,
It's the social borders in our relationships are where it all is the problem, right? Particularly with kids, with adults and kids, like that social border is so high. Like kids could contribute to mutual aid efforts so much more than they're allowed to or invited into. Liam has like this whole like mutual aid thing up in his room. It's just, we could talk about mutual aid forever. We should do a show just on mutual aid.
Hello, this is our mid-show break. We often play a song or poem in our Delighting in Our Friends segment. But today we are excited to share a jingle from one of the shows over at Channel Zero Network, because our show just joined them, and you can check out all the amazing shows over at channelzeronetwork.com. Here's our jingle from one of our favorite shows.
I'm going to make those pompous academics regret kicking out such a genius. Deciding to build my lab and do my research.
The Time Talks Podcast.
Have you ever stared at a 500-page book and wish you could just talk to the author about their ideas instead? If so, the Time Talks Podcast, part of the Channel Zero Network, is for you, where we discuss history, politics, music, and art with an anti-authoritarian and anarchist perspective.
The Time Talks Podcast.
What's this light? I feel different.
The Time Talks Podcast.
And now, back to the show.
But should I hand that over to you?
Sure, yeah.
It's a bit of a pivot.
Yeah. I am so grateful for all you do for many, many folks, but especially for LGBTQA+. I grew up in pretty radical spaces and a large, diverse community, so I was around a lot of folks who were trans and NB, etc. So it's hard for me to really see changes, but I am curious what has changed the most since you began. And I'm also curious where you found inspiration as a young person. Even though I was around a lot of folks, I got mine mostly from characters, from fictional things and stuff. So why don't you name a few?
That's cool. I will tell you, like, as a young person, I was not aware of queer and trans people. That was like not a thing in the world I was living in. I lived in a really rural place too, where there wasn't like cable TV and stuff. So like I was like living, it was the 80s, but it was really like, it might have been like the 50s or something in terms of like, representations weren't reaching me. Cause it just was like, you maybe could get like a network channel fuzzy, and, two radio stations or something. So like it wasn't like watching MTV or something, you know what I mean? To the extent that those things even were represented there. So for me, I didn't really encounter like queer and trans, like idea queer and trans people until I left home, like around 16, 17. And I think I was so inspired like by like learning like anything about queer and trans history, like learning about people fighting cops, learning about like people like, I mean, even just like I remember like reading the book Zammy by Audre Lorde, just like people having their own parties, like people just like, making social space, like, finding each other hot, like figuring out how they wanted to have sex, like having underground scenes, like special place, knowing a code, like all of that felt so freeing and radical and amazing because I'd been like immersed in this like compulsory heterosexuality of just like the grossest, like most sexist ways to be a sexual person. And it was like not even get to choose. So I feel like that stuff really inspired me. And I think a lot has changed. Like my lifetime has happened during this like mainstreaming of first like gay and lesbian stuff and then trans stuff. And it's really a painful process because like mainstreaming doesn't mean things necessarily got better for your people. It just means that the story changed about your people. So like the story of queer and trans people now is that like we represent freedom. And, if your city has like a gay cop, then it's right on or something. And then that is like excuses its whole policing. Or if your military lets gay people in, and then it's right on and it's a site of freedom. And that excuses like what the military actually does, all of that. So that's very painful for me to see our struggle and our symbols like the rainbow flag or like whatever, or our lives or our beloved dead heroes like made into like fodder for that stuff. Like it's really, really, really enraging to me. And it's also happened to many, many, many hated groups. Like this is the way that hated groups are like incorporated and then like spun back out to justify the very things that are like still killing us. Like I just saw this thing, like this headline that like the 8 richest guys in the world just became like doubly rich or whatever during the last 2 years. And that like every 4 seconds, somebody in the world dies of poverty. And so it's like, if everybody's getting poorer, except for these 8 dudes, then definitely things are so much worse for queer and trans people. So then like when people are like, it's so much better for people like you now, it's like, no. And there's this thing that happens with mainstreaming, I think, where everybody thinks they now like the group. So it'll be like, like I think in the US, like if you'd ask a bunch of people in 1940, like, what do you've asked a bunch of white people, what do you think about like Black people? They would have been like, I don't want to share water fountain and I don't like them and I don't want to go to school with them. And then if you ask them in, 2021, white people will be like, well, absolutely. I hate racism. I love Black people. But the actual conditions of Black people's lives, like they're like the amount of poverty, the amount of incarceration in many ways are worse, and like the amount of segregation of our school is actually worse than it was in 1954 when Brown versus Board of Education happened. So I feel like this is happening with queer and trans stuff where it's like the story is that we're okay, but actually, and people are like, oh, if I see like Caitlyn Jenner or like some trans person who's like perfectly passing in mainstream and a Republican, then I'm like, I feel fine about trans people. But if I actually am in a McDonald's with a trans woman going to the bathroom here, I'm going to call the cops and they're going to beat her ass. You know what I mean? Like, that's just like it's so not changing people's lives in the ways that we want. So, which isn't to say nothing's happening, because obviously like it's rad that young people could maybe find a trans character on TV or in a cartoon now, or a queer character. Like, obviously, like I hope that makes people hate themselves less and like be less like vulnerable to all the things that happen in your life when you feel like you're not supposed to exist, And I can see in queer and trans people younger than me a greater freedom about their gender and sexuality than I have. And it's like really awesome for me. Like, it's I feel liberated by it. I'm like, oh, like it's okay to look like that or do that. I could try that out or whatever. Like, I mean, also people just being really dirty. And I'm like, I love that they're so much dirtier than I thought I was allowed to be, because I was like doing all this programming of like being a Grace and Rural South as a girl or whatever, all of that, I feel like it makes my life bigger and more possible. And of course I'm worried that we're all like dying of climate change anyway, or whatever. It's like, these things are all happening at once. I'm trying to think about whether there were characters that really helped me. I mean, anytime when I was a kid, I saw somebody who was like a boyish looking girl, I was just like, I'm so into that. What is that? But I didn't have a narrative
Yeah.
about it.
I mean, the characters, they don't have to be. I think the thing is, it wasn't inspiration for me, I guess. It was more the gender envy thing, like characters that made you realize, oh no, I'm trans. I'm not attracted to this guy. I want to be this guy. Oh, like that.
Who were some of those for you?
I think they were mainly anime characters, actually. I mean, I think since I was a little kid, like there was a lot of Ghibli characters I probably had that for and all that kind of stuff. But the one I remember, I still hold this up, the first character that made me realize that I was probably trans was the main character from Fairy Tale, who is a very intense, like, man, but he's nice and just very like, it's like something a 13-year-old boy would love kind of thing. So it just, and I was a 13-year-old, possibly a boy. So that just instantly spoke to me, and I really wanted to be that character. Because before that, all the anime I watched had mainly female leads, and I was just very like, okay, cute girls, all that kind of stuff. And then I came across my first shonen, which is adventure anime, and I just was like, oh no. And just like totally opened my eyes.
Carla might remember this, but in the 80s, there were all these movies about teenagers made by like all the same director, and a lot of them are terrible. But there was a few characters like there was a movie called Some Kind of Wonderful where Mary Stuart Masterson played like this, like, I mean, she was straight in the movie, but she played this like, short-haired butch drummer, working class, and she was like hot for her, like basically like art fag best friend. I was like, this is basically my lifestyle to this day. And then there was also this really famous movie. Oh my God, with Lloyd Dobler. What was the movie? Lloyd Dobler was the main character, and he's oh my God.
Yeah, John Cusack.
Yeah, John Cusack, right? In this movie,
Say
Dobler,
anything.
Say anything. Lloyd Dobler is like, it's like he was this, because it just made me think of it because you were talking about the character who's like a dude, but he's nice. Like that was like this guy was like super cute, teenage heartthrob who's like nerdy and sensitive. And like, I mean, I wanted to like be him and be his boyfriend all at the same time. You know what I mean? Pretty much still do. But like that, to like see something that's just so desirable and not even really understand it, like not even really understand like what the desire is. But just be like into it,
Yeah, no, so many of me and my friends, we use the term gender envy for a lot of things. And sometimes it won't even be like, I have envy for that person's specific gender, them being a male. It's just like, we end up for some reason connecting the gender to that one specific character and their whole vibe. So like, oh, I have gender envy for the specific character, not for their gender and everyone's gender, just the gender they're giving off. Right. I have envy for. I don't know what that gender energy they're giving off, but I want that. And sometimes it's a character that's genderless and has nothing, but there's like, that's normally a term me and my friends will use.
That's a good term. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. I feel like we're like, because we have such different questions, we're like ping-ponging you. But
I guess before we get into the next one, I actually, since you were talking about youth today, like people in my generation, stuff like that, even like my brother's generation too, millennial, whatever, having a lot more openness to exploring gender and all that kind of stuff. I actually was curious about, I always like asking this to people who are older than me and in the LGBTQ community, is your not really opinion, but kind of how much you've seen stuff around like neopronouns and stuff like that. It can also be xenogender, whatever. There's been new terms for it. And I was just kind of curious about your knowledge on that and stuff like that, because that's like a huge thing in my generation.
You mean by that just people using pronouns that weren't very used commonly before, like people using they, them, and z here and all of those
those ones. A lot of times it can be like I have it in my pronouns, And there's a lot of other ones. People will put animals, they'll put star. There's so many of my friends where they have star in their pronouns. It's just like pronouns that are outside of the regular quote unquote human pronoun like things or whatever. And I like bringing that up with people who are not my age and really heavily using them.
Yeah. When I was coming out as trans and meeting other trans people, like in the late 90s, early 2000s, people were using Z in here and a little bit they, them, and it a little bit. And I love that has expanded. Like, I think probably, I don't know, it's just like, I think probably my pronouns would be more interesting and creative if I was 20 now instead of when I was 20. But yeah, I feel like all social movements, people who are resisting, always resisting the language. You know, like we always come up with words, like we're always changing, like this is what we want to be called, or that's not accurate anymore, or this is how we use our words, or we have this, people change spellings. Like this is just like all social movements do. So it makes perfect sense to me, and especially because in English, gender is so compulsory in a lot of the ways it's traditionally been used. I love that. And I feel very annoyed by like people who are like, this is too hard for me. It's like, you know what, it's too hard, like living out of your system. I do want to say one thing about what you said about, you know, about me, me observing that people who are younger may have like greater access to certain kinds of freedom. I also want to say the downside of living post mainstreaming, which is like, there's a path now that wasn't there or that's more well-trod to be queer or trans and try to be normal and be married and never go to any queer and trans spaces and have straight friends only. And a lot of people aren't doing that, but that's available to some people. It's depending on class and race and a lot of other things, ability, you know, but like that is a bummer to me. Like I got so much out of having to go to queer and trans spaces and hang out with whoever was there, even if they weren't like me at all. You know, and like have all these category crossing friendships and alliances and connections and having to be political and having to learn about left politics, like, you know, because the lesbians I knew were like into like international solidarity politics. I was going to learn about it. And like, if I wanted to like have a date or be cool or like have friends, I was going to like become further left. Like, I'm so glad about that. Or I was going to come to understand why we hate the cops in a different way than I would have understood as a white person. Because that's where I needed to show up to find people. That was what was being talked about. And it's not like that's not been the case for every queer person or trans person, but there's just something about going mainstream that like, it's like an invitation, you know, people call it like homonormativity, just to become like, you know, more fearful and risk averse and more tied into like the mainstream. And so that's like the downside. I think it's like, it's not happening everywhere for everyone, but like, you know, I get really sad when I like hear people who are like really into like expressing their gay connection with like a traditional like engagement ring and like the blood diamond and like have a wedding. I'm just like, these things, like as feminists, like we are like against this stuff for like really important reasons. And I'm sad when people get like, I feel like looped into something. Like the best thing about being queer, the hardest thing is that you might die of it. And the best thing about it is that like, you might get out of those kind of spells. Like you might not fall into those traps. You know, like to be happy, I must have this kind of relationship and be married in this way and have the children. And like, it's like, or not, like, you know, and I feel like frustrated and sad when queer people are reproducing those norms, and they did before too, but like, I just think there's a bigger invitation to do so now. Like at your job, you can be seen as normal gay if you're married and like monogamous and all this stuff. And I like love that queers were like, you know, we really like to have sex in the alley and like, you know, the woods, and like we meet each other in all these like criminalized spaces. And because of that, we're in deep alliance with other people who are criminalized, even if we're not, you know, sometimes we're overlapping with other categories of criminalization, sometimes we're not. And just like, there's kind of some of that feels like, it's like, you know, like when queer people are like, I'm like, we should all be against sex registries. We should all be like really concerned about like the ways that sex is criminalized. But a lot of queer people now are like, well, my sex is criminalized, so I'm going to like join the club of like being open to other people's sex being criminalized or being anti-sex worker or whatever. So it's like, I'm a little bit, overall, I would not say like things are better or worse, just like differently arranged. And there's different costs and benefits to like being more visible.
I mean, a big thing I say on so many different episodes about everything like this is, no, nothing's better, but there is this huge, what's affected the change majorly is the internet. at the end of the day, and not trying to say that in a boomer way. It's just straight up like the internet, because I'm able to, I think, I don't go to any queer spaces because my queer spaces are actually on the internet now. All the people that I feel safe with that are queer, we have group chats together on the internet instead, but that still cuts it off where a lot of these people, they don't live like that in real life. They can't live like that in real life still. As much as so many, like most of my friends on the internet are not out to their parents, and they can't be. And the internet's like that only place they feel safe, because the only thing the parents won't like catch them from taken away from them or something is their phone. So then that's like the only way. So it is like, as much as it's great that we're able to find each other this way when we're all around the world, and it's not just in the small community, but there's also that other side to it that like half these people still have to do the mainstream path in real life because their parents enforce it on them. And it's very much a bummer.
Yeah, and it's like so beautiful that we can find each other on the internet. Like the first trans people I ever knew, I met on the internet in these listservs that used to exist in the late 90s, early 2000s. Like, and I would not have, it would have been so much harder if I hadn't been able to find those people, because it took me a long time to find people I could relate to in real life. Or I like went to a trans support group at the LGBT center, but it was like not really okay to be a fag in that group. Like everybody was really straight. And I felt, just like whatever, just hard stuff, or not okay to be like my particular gender. It was like people were much more like trying to be hyper masculine or whatever. Anyway, but like I think that the dilemma is, I also see how younger people, like my students and mentees and stuff, when almost all their relationships are on the internet, they're not actually terribly safe, because, you don't have somebody who's going to come over when you're sick, or like, you don't like, there's a certain level of additional support most people need that includes some in-person connection.
Mm-hmm.
And so I worry when people have like kind of a lot of community, but it's only on the internet. Also, the internet community can be a little fragile, like because people get dragged or get kicked out or excluded differently, because somehow we're more able to dehumanize each other electronically. So then it's like, how do we make, and this relates to this conversation about mutual aid, like how do we make sure that you both have a lot of ways to communicate with people that make you feel seen and alive, and like really like someone will actually drive you to the doctor if you need it, or somebody really would like stay with you all night if you were scared because someone is stalking you, or like just like we need the in-person support super bad.
Definitely.
And we're kind of underdeveloped that. And a lot of my students, I think they are a bit de-skilled. I'm making those kinds of friends. Like they don't want to go to any meetings of student groups at school, or they don't want to go to like, I'm like, hey, like you care about this thing, I'll go with you to the activist meeting that's happening about that in town. They don't want to go there scared because they only feel comfortable in like electronic communication, but they're lonely for some in-person connection, and they need it. So it's like, I'm like, how do we have the best of it without also losing some of the other human needs that I think are falling out for people?
Yeah. And COVID's intensified it, right?
So bad.
I like co-directed a youth run space for a decade or something called the Purple Thistle Center, which was like,
I love
really
the book about it. I love that book.
Yeah. So, and that's what I'm hearing. And that's, mutual aid was in our relationships. Like it was just everywhere, how we were, how we did the space. So, I mean,
yeah, and there's people my age who would come to that space and feel completely safe. Yeah. And they had the parents who were controlling, but they were able to go there.
Yeah. Cause I was like, cause I could pass as like this nice little middle class woman, even though we were working class, but I could come off as like,
you came off as white and cis and so it was okay.
Safe, but I agree with you. But I love, it's been really neat for me to watch, I don't know, just the support to these youth globally that Liam connects with, who live in cultures where it's still not okay to be trans, at all.
Yeah,
so
a lot of my friends they'll be from Asia, like all over Asia, and then they just and sometimes don't talk to them for like weeks because they're busy in school and can't do anything else, because of that heavy control that they have, and it really sucks. I mean, this is the moment where it's kind of like, I wish there was more spaces that they would be able to go to and all these kind of things. But there's also this other side of it where I'm like, so many youth won't be able to get that kind of freedom until their parents just shut the fuck up.
Until they get of age.
Yeah.
It's going to be amazing though, when all those people get independence from their parents at once.
It's going to be amazing.
And they're going to like really shake things up, I bet.
Yeah.
Yeah, we
Exactly.
talk a lot on this show, demystifying the whole idea of youth today are so radical, and they're like,
Oh,
wait,
yeah,
we
I hate that
demystify
one.
this a lot because we know. And thanks for bringing that forward. That it's all of it's happening at once, and
Mhm.
capitalism will co-opt and use it and repurpose it, and
Or make it just individual branding. I mean, I know you
Yeah.
all must talk about this, but that feeling that like people's politics are just something they're like flashing around on the internet to look cool and to like criticize others, but they're not part of something that's creating the new world.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people think the internet is creating the new world in ways that are not quite like it's so individualized and so branded.
Mhm.
It's like, how do we I mean, it is a world that is a very important world, but it's also like it has to somehow be tied to resistance movements that aren't just like, look, I said this, like that kind of liberal myth of like, if people only said things enough or took a stand or changed their profile picture to this, whatever, and then we'd all be free. And it's like, actually that doesn't,
No.
that's never stopped a war, you know?
Never. Yeah, it's so true. How are you doing for time? I just know.
Good.
You're okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, kind of connected to that community engaged work that I know you're so part of. And I saw that you teach a class called Legal Ethics. It's so cool. Just like around, like in just the various ways in which you engage with community, both online because of COVID, but also like in movements and workshops and stuff. I'm really curious what surprises you today. Does anything surprise you?
Yeah, all the time. I mean, the uprising sure surprised me, like I mean, Occupy surprised me. Like one of the things I love about being part of social movements is you don't know when it's going to pop off. Like we're doing all of our stuff. The conditions are all the time, right? Like the conditions are, people are being killed by cops all the time. Poverty is worsening all the time. But like, why sometimes does it like pop off, And then when it pops off, there's a bunch of surprises, good and bad, like, wow, all these people want to get involved. Sweet. And oh my God, all these people have never heard of our movements. Like we're irrelevant, like, that feeling or like, or the feeling like, wow, we're back to square one on so many things we need to do. Also, I was really surprised when the rebellion popped off in summer 2020. I live in the neighborhood in Seattle where the like cops were pushed out of the precinct and there was a police-free zone. And like nonprofits, like the nonprofits, even like the ones that are more lefty, like they just didn't show up at all. Like there was plenty of things like, it's like, oh, how to like do like trainings about not doing sexual harassment. Like there's sexual harassment happening this day. There's people showing up here who've never been part of movements who are ready to be mobilized. Why isn't every single group in Seattle, whether nonprofit or not, showing up there? But like that feeling like nonprofits are so irrelevant that they're just like sticking to our little work plan and we all go to work at the right time. And like, just like the level of inflexibility of some of the structures that we think of as like part of our social movement infrastructure. I mean, it's not terribly surprising, but actually I was actually surprised. I was like, even though I know this already and I know what it's like to work in nonprofits and all the reasons why this might be happening, why people might not be showing up, I'm still actually surprised that they are not here doing anything to help this space be as generative as possible for the period it exists, to bring more people into our movements, keep people safe while they're here. Because there's just people walking in here. I mean, I was doing a lot of flyering and stuff, and some of us were working on a like kind of a mental health crisis line because a lot of people were like, had been having really scary experiences with the cops and were losing it, or just people were really wasted in the space sometimes, whatever. Just like a lot of people might have reasons to need support. And so I was flying about that and stuff. And I would just meet all these people who were just like, oh yeah, I just drove here from Idaho to join the movement. I've never been part of anything before. Like, I'm like, these people need to be welcomed and like brought in and helped to understand, what a movement is and how to get in. And I think that was, there was some, people trying to do that, but also like, I just was shocked by the difference. And I also heard these stories about Minneapolis and Kenosha and stuff, the sense that like the nonprofit sector was like leading people on a march downtown. Meanwhile, it's like, just like people who are fed up who are like burning the police station down, and burning cop cars. And to just like, I think one thing that's surprising to me a lot, or that I have big questions about, is what kinds of mobilization are we trying to build? There's the reality that in moments of those kind of spark, a lot of times the people who take the biggest risks and do the boldest action aren't necessarily already part of a movement group, even though they have a lot of awareness about the real conditions in the world because they're living them. And a lot of times those people are very young, like it's like 13, 14, 15, 16, 17-year-olds are the ones taking the biggest risks and who aren't already tied into like a job role or like a university. They're like more, at least historically, like more likely to be part of riots and do really amazing stuff and have an accurate view of what the police are and what the conditions are or whatever. And the ways in which like it just never ceases to amaze me that like nonprofit sector and the electeds and stuff like and the institutions try to like put everything back in order and right the ship and say like it's been taken care of, or like we're going to take care of it, everybody else go back to sleep. And so I guess I have a lot of questions about like, why do people mobilize when they do? How do they, who stays? Like with Occupy, it's very clear to me in Seattle, all these people who came out for Occupy, who stayed in movements and are still in groups today and kept doing things, who didn't stay. Like, why? Is there any way we could have gotten them to stay? Like, what do we need to do to prepare to like receive more people into our movements? People constantly reach out to me because I wrote a book on mutual aid to be like, how do I get involved in mutual aid in my town, like wherever they are? And so then I'll do these hunts with them where we're trying to get someone to respond to us from like any of the mutual aid groups that have a Facebook page or an Instagram, and it's like, it's hard. It's really actually hard to get into the movement, which sucks, So I think like I'm constantly surprised by that, both surprised by what is working and what isn't. Because I think I feel very like urgent about that question.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. That's actually a perfect thing into the next question, which is great. Because of the getting people to join, stuff like that. We are keen on breaking down the social borders around age, and it's not always a straightforward path on how to do that well. So in fact, what we hear a lot is many teens point out that in movements, it can feel performative or tokenistic. So with that in mind, do you have any advice for older organizers on welcoming / including teens in sincere ways?
Yeah. I don't know that I am amazing at this, to be really honest with you. I'm like, how much of my work it's like closely involved with teens. So I'll just be real about that. I think that what I have seen work in general, but then I also think it works a lot with teens too, is like, I think when people show up to like, they're pissed or scared and they want to be part of something to fight back, they want to be like given something to do. You know what I mean? Like people want to like when we were in that police free zone that was called Chaz or Chop in Seattle, people would show up and like, if somebody was doing gardening, they'd be like, I'm on it. If somebody was building a giant sculpture, they'd be like, I'm on. People want to like do something with the energy that they have, Sometimes people really want to help someone else with something that they've been through or something they've heard about. So I feel like that's like the move. And in Seattle, some of the like youth organizations I admire most just do like a lot of really creative projects. Like we were fighting this youth jail that we were trying to get to not be built here for many, many years. And like a bunch of people like made a really incredible music video about it. That was like a lot of young people and like a couple adults, it's like that kind of thing. Like that's so fun. And like, it was a really, really useful piece of propaganda for us. It was a really compelling video and like, it was really great song and stuff. So like, I just feel like that's more sincere, is like not being like, we want you to sit here and say that you were part of us, but instead like, we need you to like, join us in some stuff that, or help us figure out what we should do next with this and then do it. I think it's just like more, it's more honest instead of just like, we want to say that we're youth here,
That's a great answer, because really you made it not about age, which is amazing. Because it's just really about hospitality and trusting each other and like, that deep hospitality of like, hey, I'm making this mural over here and I would love your input, like no borders up and no weirdness. Yeah,
Definitely.
Yeah, that's cool. You seem to have, like I've noticed this in your work and in this conversation, really insightful answers to our questions and to questions in general that are like perplexing many of us. And I'm just curious, what are you utterly confused or vexed about these days?
So many things. I mean, I have some really deep concerns that our models are really inadequate for what we're facing. I don't think our movements are getting bigger at the rate that climate change would need them to. Like the rate that climate change is destroying people's lives and is going to, and causing suffering, and our opponents are totally winning at like expanding extraction constantly. And our movements are small. Most people haven't heard of them in any real way. Hard to get into. And we are like totally tearing each other apart inside our groups with our like, reproducing the social dynamics of the society. So I think like a lot of people, I spend a lot of time, as I said, like working with mutual aid groups and dealing with conflict. And I'm like, yeah, there's tools out there. Like, yes, it can be really helpful to do like workshops on how to give and receive feedback and to do workshops on generative reparative conversations and stuff. And still like one person who's having like a really extreme, like trauma-informed response to something can destroy a group. And that is so scary to me. Like, I'm just like, I feel like Carla and Liam were attacking me and they don't see me. And now I am going to like block every decision in this group or start a campaign that tells everybody that they're all the things that are bad about you all and give you all some label that makes that work for me. And like, maybe use reductive identity politics or throw around other kinds of like, hot button words. And like, I can literally like bring our work to a screeching halt. And I see this happen again and again and again. And we cannot afford it. Even if all the groups weren't doing that, we'd still be too small. And because we have to like stop the US military. Like we have to, like our opponents are formidable, they are heavily armed and this thing that the forces they've already set in motion, like climate change, are like we're going to have to be so well organized and so principled to even just reduce some suffering around what's like already definitely going to unfold. So I think I really struggle with like those things really freak me out. And I'm just like, well, one foot in front of the other, like what can I do right now to help? And maybe it'll help if I help these people have like a workshop on giving and receiving feedback at their mutual aid group. Like, it's like kind of like, I'm one person, can I be of service? And just like, I definitely can't control this. I definitely am going to live through this with everyone else. I just assume that a million people are doing things I can't see that are helping. And I trust us. And I am in a sober reality about how bleak things are. And it's like, yeah, we'll go down fighting. And the world has ended for many groups of people many times. And so who am I to think I should live in a time that isn't like that? I mean, I don't know, this is like, people have lived through horrible, horrible things. And there may be very little human life left after the things that are unfolding now. But, what do you do when that's happening? You just share and connect and make your next best guess and try to pay attention to what's happening and not just keep doing the same thing that's not working over and over again. I mean, it's like, that's the kind of stuff that I think about, acknowledge mistakes, like look for patterns, like read history to see if people tried something that might be helpful now. I mean, that's just like, I feel like I can give that message to people in a way that's sincere. I used to give a much more hopeful message in my 20s. Like I was just like, we're going to win. And I'm like, I have no fucking idea what's going to happen. And we're going to fight and care for each other because there's no alternative. I mean, I have to endorse your book, Joyful Militancy. Like that book is so incredibly helpful about connecting the scale of how can we treat each other in the day-to-day and what is kind of going wrong there. What are some patterns around what's going wrong there? And like, what is it we're fighting for? And what's our, like, what would it feel like to live in that new world? I think all the time about the story you include in that book about giving everybody who is part of Purple Thistle keys to the space, and just like how utterly different that is than like nonprofit youth services, schools, et cetera. And like what it's like to practice the social relations we're trying to build. That's like just one of my favorite examples of that. I mean, there's a million things like that in that book.
Mm-hmm, definitely.
Thank you. Oh, I didn't even know that the key story. Every time we, this is a quick side. Nick and I didn't tour the book at all, but we did a couple of really fun things over in Europe with it. One was like, we got to work with artists and we made food together and then built structures around the concepts in the books and then talked about it. I mean, I was like, I feel so seen by you guys that you invited me to do that. But Nick always has to go tell them the key story because they'll be like, trust is so abstract. And I'm like, yeah, but it works.
I mean, we gave keys.
And I forget.
Yeah, we gave keys to our house.
It's true.
To close friends of us. Like it was
all ages.
Yeah. Like my close friends, your guys' close friends, like we would give them keys to our house because if something happens to them, we want them to be able to come to a safe space.
Yeah.
And that was the same with the Thistle, right?
Yeah.
Is being able to have that openness to go whenever you want.
Yeah. And just like, everything you just said, just like, I like actually felt choked up because it's exactly the stuff I like grapple with. And but it's true. Like we just really only can show up and beam another way, another possibility. And I'm so glad you're doing that work, because you just beam with delight and energy, and it's good that it comes with some militancy and some like hard truth, and not just a hope, like a passive hope, but a more of an active hope. And it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Which it connects to our next question.
So given the ongoing crises we are facing, do you at all still, feel hopeful for the future? And, what are you hopeful for and hoping for and all of that?
I feel like you kind of just answered that, but if you could maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I am having some midlife experiences that make me believe that healing is possible. It's not easy, that is really helpful, because I don't know about you guys, but it can feel to me like, oh my God, I have like this trauma and the stuff that happened to me as a kid, and I'm still always reacting to it. And there's some behaviors I have that I don't like, and it's really hard to change them because I get scared and I do them again, And so to really see that decades of trying to transform my relationship to myself and others can allow me to actually have more capacity is a real relief. And it's like, because it's like, and I hope everyone gets to have chances to try that. It's really hard when you're living with the boot on your neck, in a lot of ways. But I feel that helps me with hope, just some of those interpersonal experiences of like, and like, even like having an injury and having my body actually heal when it seemed like it would never heal, and just being like, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't need to know. I don't need to, let's leave room that something might be a little easier than you thought it would be, because it's so easy to be like, expect things to be harder than you thought they'd be, because that happens a lot too. And I think I feel, it's just like every time I hear about like some rad action people did, or like some way people coordinated that I wasn't expecting, or like you hear about people like doing the work blocking the pipelines or doing trees. I met all these young people. I went to give a talk at like Virginia Tech in like, I don't know, maybe a couple years before the pandemic. And I happened to meet these people who were doing this tree sit to block the Mountain Valley pipeline, I think. And they were like all these young trans people who had all been like, yeah, we're dropping out of school to just tree sit. And I just was like, that is so beautiful. Like, I think probably that's what I should have done with my life. You know what I mean? But I was just like, people are doing brave, hard, beautiful things. They have this whole community around what, the culture of the scene where they were doing these sits, and they had to move a couple of times and then started new ones. And they like connected to the neighbors in this like parts of Virginia and West Virginia in these really beautiful ways, but also they were having this like amazing queer trans counterculture and getting to be trans women and stuff like in these ways that like, I just was like, this is like, I didn't know this was here. I didn't know I'd find this in my home state and like at this weird conference, just like, I feel like there's this kind of like, I think I get hope out of the fact there's like more going on than any of us know. People are doing amazing stuff. They always have. Like, keep your eye on that while you also keep your eye on like, what our opponents are doing, which of course we have to, and that can be really overwhelming. So I think that I get a lot out of that. And then also I like read a lot of social movement history. Like, it's just like, like I went on this walking tour in London, like a little while ago before the pandemic, where it was like about people fighting back against this fascist, the Battle of Cable Street, I think, or something like that, fighting back against this fascist march. And it's like these people, the trolley drivers like drove the trolleys and blocked the march, like giving up their jobs. Like people just because they wanted to block the Jewish quarter from being brought, the fascists were in the Jewish quarter. They weren't even Jewish. Like just like people do these amazing acts of solidarity and take these huge risks. That feels really good to me to like feel like, oh, like there's possibility, So I think that I reach for stuff like that. Or I mean, I went to Palestine once on a delegation of queer and trans activists from the US visiting Palestine, and like the kinds of determined resistance that I met people doing, like just like the risk taking combined with like the fortitude. I just was like, if this person can do it under these conditions, I can sustain some level of hope and certainty and engagement, because these are really, really hard conditions of like losing your whole life, having your people keep losing and losing and losing, So yeah, I think those things are like kind of footholds for me, given the conditions. Yeah.
It's really good.
Love that.
Mhm.
Did you have something you want to say? Okay. We have like 2 more questions that we ask everybody.
Great. I have a really long attention span for various weird reasons. So
I'm good.
Amazing. Okay, I don't know the listeners, but I'm good.
So the whole platform of Grounded Futures is this idea that, amid all these crises, all the forces coming at us, we can begin by finding thriving in our everyday life. And so we like to ask our guests how they find thriving amid the fuckery that is around us all the time.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, connection to nature is huge for me. I mean, I live in the middle of the city, but just like walking around, looking up the plants on the street, and also, during the summer, I go backpacking and stuff like that. Just like more time. I've had to really learn to orient towards solitude. I've gotten like really into meditation practice and into silent retreats, like basically building more sense of self by doing more solitude, which is really hard to access in our culture because we're all constantly listening to like podcasts and music, and we never stop taking in other people's ideas. And so finding finding ways to do total silence and build more skills about feeling myself really has, I think, really kind of like matured me and like helped me be able to deal with complex feelings or like difficult situations that could really activate like feeling like bad about yourself or mad at other people. Like having practices that help me notice what's going on in me so that I don't just act out the reaction. I can be like, oh, Dean, you're having that feeling. It's related to this thing that happened when you were a kid really more, but you're thinking it's about Carla now. And so how can you be nice to yourself about that? And remember, like, that's not Carla. And, just like ask a friend or, like just having that tiny little peak of like, not just go right into it, but like a little bit of perspective. That all those kind of practices, which also like therapy, somatics. I mean, I do all that stuff, and that has all helped me with that because I was not raised with any of those skills, and it's a rough situation. And I'm really, I'm really social. I like really love a gay bar. I really love like a party. I love meeting people. I miss that. The pandemic has been hard with not getting to like go around, talk to other activists about ideas. Although I also have met a lot of people because we're connecting electronically. But yeah, I love like people. I'm just like that. I think that's what the motivation for the work, and it's interesting to me. You know what I mean? I'm just like, it's like entertaining. I'm just like, oh, I want to like, be at some meeting with somebody, and then afterwards like get to like just hear everything about them and like why this and how did you get into that and why do you know about that and why have you read that, and so I think that for me also is like thriving is like both light and deep social connections. Like I missed that with the experience of being in the pandemic. Mostly we have one-on-one outside, like I can go on a walk with one person, but I can't like flit around. Like I like to do social butterflying a little too, just being like, how's everybody? What's going on? What's the topic? Like I think that I find that really like fun, and it makes me love people, and like love of people is pretty essential ingredient to like keeping doing work that puts you in a lot of contact with different kinds of suffering. Yeah.
I just see you as a little pollinator. Dean the pollinator. Big time.
Yeah.
I love it.
Amazing. So moving on then.
Yeah.
That was a great answer to all of that. But anyways, moving on. Do you have a book or any piece of media that you would recommend to youth to gain inspiration from, or perhaps one that inspired you? Feel free to name a few.
One thing I really love the Young Lords Reader, which is it's an anthology of like the Young Lords. They're, a group in the 70s focused on Puerto Rican liberation and doing both work to like address colonialism in Puerto Rico and the lives of Puerto Ricans, living in the United States. Puerto Rico, of course, is part of the United States at this point, but whatever, the other parts of the United States. And so that book is just like their newspaper. So it's like all stuff written by people who were like 15 to 20, about what they saw in the world, and like they would sell this newspaper. So I love it because it's like all these really radical ideas, like but broken down to really short things that are really readable. it's fun to see how radical the ideas were that were circulating then that now would seem like totally like so far beyond most people have heard of. So I love that. And I love to pair that with the movie about the Young Lords called Palante Siempre Palante, which people can watch online. That was made in 1996 by one of the Young Lords. And so I think that story, because it's just like you just see really radical stuff being done by young people. They just like took over a church and were like serving breakfast out of it and doing all these programs. Like they took over part of a hospital, like just like the level of like, we can just do whatever we want. We can just pursue what we believe in. We can break all the rules. You know, the Young Lords started, when they first started, they were inspired by the Black Panther Party. They wanted to start something like that. And they're like, what should be our first thing? How are we going to bring people in? So they're asking people in the community, what do you care about? And everybody was like, trash. We're so mad that like the trash doesn't get picked up in our neighborhood more. So they did this trash offensive where they put all the trash in the street, but also they like went down to the city, whatever, like the sanitation authority. And they were like, give us brooms, give us things to clean up our neighborhood. And they just took them all, and just like how powerful it is. Like they really believed that people in your community should see you fight the cops in the street, because it would free them just to even see that, this kind of like bold anti-authoritarian action. So anyway, I love the Young Lords as like in those two particular things, that book and that movie go together really well. And you can just read like a tiny part of the book, you know what I mean? And it's because it's all these pieces from their newspaper. I also read tons of science fiction. You know, I really do believe like it's hard for me to picture the world we're trying to build, like a world without hierarchy, a world without, you know, our lives being run by bosses and government. And so I find that really helpful. Obviously, a lot of people love Octavia Butler. I love her books. I really loved, recently I read an excerpt of this book, The Actual Star. I can't remember the name of the author. It's a newer book. I haven't read the whole thing yet. I'm waiting for it from the library. But it's a book that helped me kind of picture like an anarchist world. The book The Dispossessed by Ursula Le Guin helped me picture that at some point. Like, I don't know. I just feel like science fiction like is a useful tool for my imagination, because what I want is so different from what we have now. And that's like, who's imagining that, I think.
Yay. We haven't had that answer before, the first part. That's so cool. I can't wait to share that with folks. And of course,
there's something interesting too, just about what we were saying just before that, and the question about thriving and being a social butterfly and stuff. There's this way, I feel like I was really shaped by the fact that during the height of the AIDS crisis, queer people took care of each other so intensely while the government abandoned people who were dying so intensely. Mm-hmm. And a lot of those care networks were the result of promiscuity. Like, I don't know if you all feel this way, but it's like, if I know that you fucked my best friend, I care about you.
Totally.
Do you know what I mean? Like I like, if I hear that you're dying of cancer, I'm going to like send money to the GoFundMe, or I'm going to like show up with soup, even if we haven't met, just because I associate you with my best friend, and like you screwed, like, you know what I mean?
Totally.
Like, and like, all my best friends have screwed like a lot of people, you know? So that's like a really good network. You know what I mean? Like, so I guess I just like, I really deeply believe in promiscuity. And I think that also my work as a writer, I put together ideas that you're not supposed to, because I didn't really learn them in academia. So I just like, I read this, and to me, they spoke to each other, and people are always like, you can't do Foucault with that. They hate each other. And I'm like, well, you know, I think there's something about like, can we be like that kind of promiscuity, what it's looking for, I'm like reading a book and I'm looking for what I like in it, not just what I don't like. Yes. And I'm like meeting people and I'm looking for how could you be part of my movement? How could I include you, instead of like what I don't like about you, or, you know what I mean? Like that kind of like, that's the eyeballs I want to have on the world, you know? And I think that promiscuity is a fun word for that, because also it's a way to like take back like a sex positive approach, and, you know, because that word is like morally, you know, judged or whatever. You guys can still hear me, even though I'm frozen. You can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah, you're totally.
I just wanted to share that idea. Yeah,
it was. That's perfect. I love it. I couldn't agree more. We're entangled, and I also write from that place. So solidarity. Yeah. Well, that was awesome. And we'd like. Is there, before we end, how can our listeners find you?
Most of my work is on deanspade.net. Like, a lot of stuff to read for free, and a lot of videos and stuff. Yeah, probably the easiest place. Okay. And is there anything else you'd like to say that you missed? No, I'm just so glad I got to be here. I really hope I get to hang out with you all in person sometime. We don't live that far apart, as I understand it.
Thanks for listening to our show. Grounded Futures is a media production and mentorship collaborative, and this podcast is produced by Carla Bergman, Liam Joy, Jamie Lee Gonzalez, and Melissa Roach. And our sound tech is by Chris Bergman.
Resources and transcripts for this episode are in the show notes. If you want to donate some funds or check out our other awesome shows, head over to groundedfutures.com or email us with comments and suggestions at groundedfutures@gmail.com. And please tune in next time to hear more from our incredible guests on how to thrive in the everyday.
Yeah, but that's in the future. Oh, I hate the future.